Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined as always by King Newbie and Werepossum, Matt Freeman.
I'm dead.
So folks, I just want you all to know that before we started the show, we were working on the script, on the introduction, and I asked Matt what kind of were animal he wanted to be. He could have chosen anything in the whole world, and this is the first thing he came up with. Werepossum.
Dead. So, I want you to know that I've been sitting here with my hands up in the air, like pretending that I'm lying on my back, dead.
Well, I mean, that's the important part of it, right? If you don't have that, you don't sell it.
It's not convincing. Yeah.
This week on the show, our coverage of the Talisman continues with part 3. This time we're covering chapters 10 through 14 of this so far really enjoyable novel. A whole bunch happens this week, Matt. It's another very, very stuffed episode, so I don't want to waste too much time here at the beginning. But overall, what are you thinking about the book so far?
I'm really enjoying the just the pacing of it, the situations we're getting into. It's unusual. Like, it's definitely an unusual book. I think largely because of the fact that we have this 2-author thing going on. Mm-hmm. But it all adds up to just being a fun old time, actually, and very well written too.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, I think you're right that there are some unusual. Some of the structure is a little bit weird to me this time around. And I don't say bad, I say weird, because like there's, choices and moments where I'm like, I wonder why we did it that way. And maybe we can try to get to the bottom of some of those this week. But overall, you're right. I've been having fun with it. It's a fun read.
Yeah, there's certain things where I'm like, what is this here for?
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel like I'll need to reread it to understand, because, like we talked about a little bit last week, the idea that if the two authors don't have totally identical senses of like what the book is about, or what the primary thrust of the theme is supposed to be, then you can end up with bits and pieces that just kind of stick out at odd angles, and you're just like, what was this supposed to be about? But it's all interesting though.
I do wonder if they had conversations while they were writing about like, hey, Pete, what do you think the theme of this thing we're making is? Like, what are we actually trying to say here? And, even if they had conversations about that, there's still, while the process of writing, you come up with these ideas, and the ideas might not necessarily gel with what the other person is doing, but you can kind of see maybe how they like, there's a lot of like taking that idea and running with it and trying to see where it goes. And I don't know, like, again, I'm very uncertain about the actual process that went into writing this book, how they actually did it. So I just don't know. But yeah, I mean, you just kind of think about what a group project is like, and do that, but with two people pouring their soul into this thing that they're creating. So
yeah,
it does allow for really interesting things to kind of pop out of it, for sure.
One thing that occurs to me, just on this topic, is it's funny. I forgot this until this exact moment, but you and I have actually co-written something. It's just unreleased.
That's true.
And the thing about co-writing that I've always noticed is like, it's not really the most important part of writing is editing, right? Like this is sort of well understood. And what usually happens is one person out of the group that is writing a thing will kind of have to be the one who sits down and says, all right, I'm going to edit this into a coherent, unitary thing. At least that's how it's always happened when I've been a part of a writing group that was collaborating on something. And I wonder if that's what happened here. Like, I wonder if they literally, edited in parallel, or if one of them just kind of took over and formed it into a coherent whole, or if they talked through it, or, there's a whole bunch of different ways it could have gone, right? Like it could have been they took turns writing scenes, and then one or the other of them kind of polished it and made it coherent. And then it would be really interesting to know which one of them it was. And then maybe that's not true. Maybe they both went through it together. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but the point being, like, the editing pass is actually, especially now that we're as far as we are in the book, I'm starting to think more about the editing pass, because that's where theme pops out. That's where the coherence of the story and the message pops out.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And gosh, I wish I knew more about how exactly they did this, because I think it's probably that, right? I think you're right that there's going to be one person at the keys at some point, but they're going to be working on it together. So maybe they get together, talk about a scene, one person goes off and writes it, then they edit it together, or they each takes it and edits it, and then it's most likely exactly like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
But it's fascinating. It's fascinating because, I mean, the other big things that I've read that have multiple authors, like we talked about last week, are things where literally they just took turns with chapters, right? And so the differences in style between the two writers was the point. And that is not what's going on here for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to get right into it?
Let's do it.
Before we do that, I just want to say that we got a lot of comments on Hitchhiking. It's one of those things where I start into a rant, and then midway through the rant, I realized that, I'm being very close-minded and assumptive that my experiences are the experiences of the entire world. A lot of people said that they still see people out hitchhiking. They've never picked them up themselves, but we did have a lot of people that wrote in that were like, "Oh yeah, I've seen people hitchhiking all the time," and I've done it before, and people have been very friendly. And so, what do I know is the conclusion to that. What do I know?
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that we had people write in to say, "What the fuck are you guys talking about?" I hitchhike.
Yeah,
totally makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
Not in my neck of the woods, though. I guess we're not friendly here in Texas. We're just like, hell, though, I'm not picking you up.
Yeah, maybe there's parts of the country where it makes more sense, or maybe it's like, if you don't live near certain like highways that are going to have a lot of kind of interstate long range traffic, then it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, that's true.
To even try, I don't know. I don't really understand the whole phenomenon, but that it's fascinating though.
Yeah. So hitchhiking still exists. In conclusion,
still exists.
All right, let's get right into our first chapter of the week, which is chapter 10, called Elroy. The thing I love about this, Matt, is I think that's true of just about every single chapter in this section, and perhaps in this whole book, that we go into the chapter not knowing what this means, and so like we have no idea who Elroy is when we're going into this chapter. But yeah, I think it makes those headings a little more evocative.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I would say most of these chapter titles have been slightly opaque or completely opaque.
Yeah, because I think the next one after this is chapter 11, The Death of Jerry Bledsoe, and we're just like, who's that guy,
right? And
why does he die? Of course, that's a big plot point in this week. But yeah, no, I like it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But we resume our discussion on the same night in Oakley Tavern, with poor traveling Jack still trapped here. The chapter starts out with Jack once again thinking the phrase "when I was 6," which is a beat that we're going to hear over and over and over again throughout the early part of this week's reading, until we finally figure out why this constant refrain is in his head. But I want to talk about it as kind of a tone setter for the chapter, right? Because the first words of the chapter are once again, "I was 6, Jackie boy was 6," and it really, establishes this very uncomfortable tone in the early parts of this week's reading.
Mm. Yeah. It's a very strange motif. It does make you like he's already in a terrible situation, and then this is making you actually kind of feel like he's losing it a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. So when going into the back to get a case of Bud Light, Jack once again bumps into the man who looks like Randolph Scott, the actor. We will see in a bit that this is the chapter's titular Elroy, and Elroy tells Jack he was supposed to get gone. And we see here that Jack could smell dead meat on its breath. I love the detail that we use its here. We haven't even seen Elroy fully transform yet, but Jack is already referring to him as an it. And it's also a great link back to the territories, right? Like that smell of meat that we were so often reminded of on Jack's early trips to the territories. I think that links Elroy to the territories really, really solidly here.
I also love the descriptor "dead meat." It's like, I mean, really all meat is dead meat. That if you're smelling it, it's probably dead.
Yeah,
but it's still. I'm not making fun of it. Like it's a great word that gives you a certain feeling, a certain kind of offensive, upsetting connotation.
Yeah, well, and the expression is "you're dead meat," right? So like, like Jack smelling dead meat on its breath, like literally, oh, I'm dead meat.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's normally, you know, when we talk about who we think wrote what, I think we've leaned towards saying like, God, this feels very Kingian.
Mm-hmm.
This is one instance where I feel more comfortable comparing to something distinctly Straubian, because this character, the way he's portrayed, kind of everything about him reminds me very strongly of the particular monster in the book Ghost Story that we read. This feral imagery and smells of meat and blood. I'm sure you remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we don't get a 4-page backstory on Elroy, so it can't be King. No, but I think you're right. Stylistically, this does feel like a Straubian monster for sure. He's an interesting character.
Yeah.
But there is something Kingian going on here, Matt, because we employ a Stephen King structure break again, because from here we cut back in time to learn why the heck Jack was so scared of the phone and learn why Elroy is telling him you were supposed to get gone, because that's a thing we don't know. It's like he's referring to something we haven't heard yet. So I guess like I normally like this kind of, you know, moving back and forth through time structure thing, but I feel like, and maybe I'm alone here, but I feel like we're cutting back and forth in timelines so much in these last few chapters that the stuff kind of stacks on top of each other in almost a confusing way where maybe you lose track of exactly when and where you are. Am I alone in that? Did you feel that way at all?
I did become a bit disoriented by the time jumping, especially in the audio book form where I can't, you know, see, for example, if there's like a section break, and which might give me a clue. But there's a little bit of an upside to losing track, which is that the whole interlude in the tavern just kind of blurs into this feverish nightmare the longer Jack stays there. You know, he first arrives, everything is very sane and normal, and you can keep track of what's happening pretty well. But then by the end, there's monsters, there's weird magic, evil voices, and we feel totally adrift. And you know, frankly, certain things I was like, I'm not even sure if this is actually happening. Like for example, you know, as the guy turns into a monster, I'm like, is he really turning into a monster, or is this like a mental phenomenon that like, is this Jack having a breakdown of some kind? That was at least a thought that occurred to me in the moment because of how like dreamlike everything had become.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a great point. It actually makes me like it a little bit better. It's like, instead of saying, hey, the structural thing you chose here made this confusing for me, you're kind of saying, yes, however, point. Like that's what we were trying to do here, is make this time in this bar, this nightmare in a lot of ways. And I think you're right. And I mean, it does escalate rather quickly. And it doesn't actually escalate rather quickly because Jack is there for 3 days before things really get like otherworldly bad. But because of the cutting and the structure of it, it feels like it escalates very quickly to monster movie in a lot of ways. You're right. And so that does make the encounter with Elroy almost feel like, how can this actually be happening? Especially because we've firmly established, you know, the territories is the place of the otherworldly scary shit. This is the place of the mundane scary shit, like Smokey, you know, who is a bad dude in much the same way Osmond was a bad dude, but he's a bad dude in a much more real world type thing. And then suddenly we have this invasion of a were creature that is hunting Jack in the real world, and it just feels wrong. Like, you're not supposed to be able to cross this threshold. Like, I left the scary monster storybook.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess I didn't think of that consciously, but yeah, this is absolutely showing us that the supernatural beings can hunt him in this world as well.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to read this because I love the way the voice on the phone is described when Jack picks up the phone and hears this. The voice that came out of the phone was the cracked, rasping croak of something long dead, some creature which could never be seen by the living. The sight of it would drive a living person insane, or strike him dead with frost etchings on his lips and staring eyes blinded by cataracts of ice. Jack, the scabrous, rattling voice whispered up into the earpiece, and his face went numb. the way it did when you needed to spend a heavy day in the dentist chair and the guy needled you up with a little too much Novocaine. You get your ass back home, Jack. Like that's so good. That writing there is just the way it describes this. It's so good, man.
Yeah. I love that. I love all of the supernatural stuff here, and that to me also feels Straubian for some reason. I
agree.
I can't quite pin it down this time. I guess there were creepy phone things involved in Ghost Story.
There definitely were. Yeah, I agree. And this is, I mean, maybe better people than us can like clearly delineate the differences in their styles. For me, it's just mostly a feeling where I read something like this. It feels like what it felt like to read Ghost Story for me. Like just the way the word usage he's here, the sentence construction here feels very Peter Straub to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Just like this, like something long dead, some creature which could never be seen by the living. The sight of it would drive a living person insane or strike him dead with frost etchings on his lips. I think it's that frost etchings on his lips and staring eyes blinded by cataracts of ice. That feels like Peter Straub to me.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so we now cut to a different moment in time where the phone is ringing once again, and Jack and Elroy look knowingly at each other, which is a really interesting beat, right? Because you kind of realize that perhaps it was Elroy on the phone the first time, and now the phone is ringing again, and Elroy is like, You gonna get that?
Yeah, maybe so. That didn't occur to me, actually. I figured, for whatever reason, I kind of figured the voice on the phone is like something much more evil and more powerful than whatever Elroy is.
Sure.
But I don't like. Here's the thing: who knows?
Yeah, no, that's fair. And who? I mean, we know the phone call later will be Morgan, right? But this voice was described as so distinctly different that I don't think it could be Morgan. It seems weird that it would be Elroy as well. You know, when you describe a voice as belonging to a creature that just looking at it would strike you dead, and then it's just like a weregoat, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I think you're probably right there.
It just feels right to me.
But I do like this line here. She might have been an actress in a play, and all the customers' extras paid the standard SAG rate of $35 a day. The only two real people in the world were him and this dreadful cowboy with the big hands and the eyes that Jack could not quite see.
That's so great.
It's so great. Like, and it's a detail that gets it for me, you know, like it's not just she might have been an actress in a play and everyone else extras. It's the detail of going the extra mile of saying extras paid the standard SAG rate of $35 a day, you know, like to go that extra mile for almost no reason, but it just enhances the sentence for me. I don't know. And I don't even know why, but it just, it makes it more real.
What's funny is that now that I've decided that this section was written by Straub, I think that is Straub channeling King.
No, I think you're onto something there for sure. So we find ourselves back in the present time with Jack face to face with Elroy and his yellow eyes. I mean, I guess we kind of talked about this in the first week, but the eyes is something that both King and Straub are going back to a lot here. People's eyes. It's very, very focused on eyes in this book a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm not offering a reason why here. I'm just pointing it out.
Yeah, right. I certainly don't really know what to make of it yet.
Yeah. But Jack is saved by the smoky bell here as the bar owner appears to yell at Jack about being slow again. And this makes Elroy back off. But as he has done in the past, Jack loses his temper here again. And I really love this line. Jack's fury suddenly rose up. That sort of fury, closely linked as it is to a sense of hopeless injustice, is perhaps never as strong as it is at 12. College students sometimes think they feel it, but it is usually little more than an intellectual echo.
Yeah, this is true because I'm still mad about injustices that happened when I was a kid. So
yeah, I love this idea, and I think this is part of a trend that we've seen a little bit in the book so far, but I think is going to really continue in this the rest of this week's reading. Is this once again we're doing this thing with that King does a lot, is delineating very clearly between childhood and adulthood, and the differences that that age difference manifest in how people perceive things and how people act and how people do things. It's like King is constantly interested in children and the way they perceive the world and their reactions to the world. And that is very, very true with our character of Jack.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. I mean, yeah, I agree completely. Like, this is exactly the sort of thematic thing that I've noticed over and over, especially in the last, I guess, 3 books that we've read that have
Mhm.
been very much about young people. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
I mean, it even started with Salem's Lot, right? Like we had like it's not
Hmm.
enough that we have a character like Mark Petrie. We also make it about, you know, the fact that he is a child
Yeah.
even outside of Mark Petrie, the difference between fear as a child and fear as an adult, and like it's something King has been doing from the very, very, very beginning.
Yeah, and I mean, Jake is certainly yet another example of this. Although, it's funny now. I want to go back and reread the books, The Dark Tower, paying more attention to the way King is treating Jake as
Yeah.
a young man on the cusp of adulthood. Um, I want to say that he's treating him in a very different way than he tends to treat his other characters, because that's a very different situation that he's in. But
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think when Jake gets to take center stage in the stories, we kind of automatically fall back into this. The thing I'm thinking of is every time we kind of see hints at Jake's, home life before he comes to Midworld, like we do see a lot of this struggle of a young child against a
mm,
world he doesn't quite understand yet. And I think Wolves of the Calla is the place where it is, to me, most clearly similar to other young king young king character stuff where we're seeing Jake in this
mhm.
liminal state, desperately clinging on to pieces of his childhood while recognizing that those are mostly already gone anyway.
Yeah, now that you've said that, you reminded me of those parts of the story there. Yeah, that's definitely very reminiscent of what we've been reading recently.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so we see here that he talks back to Smokey, right? Like he has this sense of hopeless injustice, and like Jack has done again and again throughout the story, he talks back to him, which only results in him getting smacked around a little bit more. There is something, I don't know, Smokey's a jerk, and he's already slapped around the woman whose name I'm blanking on right now. And we see him smack around Jack a little bit here, but there's something just different to me about when he like literally like cocks his fist back and just like punches him in the
Hmm.
face, right? Like that is, I don't know, like I'm not saying like it's okay to smack a person around, but you can't actually punch them. But it just seems that's an escalation of the violence where it's just like shoving and pushing and maybe smacking to full like to I'm gonna fucking give you a jab in your face.
Yeah,
I don't know, like it
sure.
kind of took me aback a bit.
Well, yeah, I think slapping is usually more about shocking someone, giving them a sense of
Yeah,
fear and making them embarrassed. Whereas if you really wind back and slug somebody, then you're trying to injure them. You're trying to knock them out potentially, or at least there's a very high risk that you'll accidentally injure them,
yeah, sure,
which I think can just sort of conveys a level of dangerousness, right? Like if
sure.
he's like at this point, what Smokey's trying to communicate isn't like, I'm gonna embarrass you. It's like, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to injure you. I'm going to potentially kill you if you don't shut up and get in your place.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's an escalation of the abuse for sure. I think you're spot on there.
Because the sense that you get overall from Smokey is like, he's not a guy who got where he is by bluffing or puffing himself up. Like he's absolutely willing to back up his threats with actual violence. Like you get the
Yeah,
feeling that he's totally murdered people.
totally. Didn't you love the part though where like Smokey's initial gut reaction to Jack standing up for himself was to be taken aback for just a brief moment before he collected himself? I
Mhm.
found that so powerful. Like you can tell this is a man that is just not used to people speaking or pushing back against him in any kind of way. And it's not like it stops him, but just like the shock of it, I think was I loved the detail of that.
Yeah, that if anything made him seem more dangerous,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
he's like, oh, that this never happens. Oh well, and then he just without really hesitating just slugs him.
yeah. Fortunately, Smokey is too distracted by some gunshots that go off in his bar, and Jack decides that now is the time to escape. He plans to do so in the exact way that you predicted last week, of course, Matt, by grabbing his magic potion and flipping over back into the territories. So he's got the potion. He's got easy access to it, but, well, he actually wants to leave the bar before he flips because, like, I guess he's worried about, like, going in like the middle of a family dinner or something, or it turns out this place is a tavern in the territory, so he would just maybe pop in the middle of a bar, and that would have some difficulty explaining how he got there. So he has to get out of the establishment first, and to do that he's got two options. One is leading by the loading bay door, which will immediately light up a warning light at the bar, which would send Smokey after him. Option two is down the hallway and out the broken emergency exit out back, but to do that he has to go by the bathroom that he knows Elroy is in. And so he's got a choice here, Matt, and for the third time in this podcast series we see the lady or the tiger, Smokey or the mill hand.
I love it. I have to ask: does King employ this lady or the tiger thing in any of the non-Dark Tower adjacent books? Because there's something so magnificent and like fantastical about the phrase. It just seems like it's a perfect calling card of like, this is a Dark Tower adjacent story.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, probably because it's something he seems to use so often, but I cannot recall. It's one of those things that like I never paid enough attention to just in the course of reading, and it's only doing these close reads with you that I've noticed how often this particular expression reoccurs, which I honestly, and I think maybe we said this the first time we talked about this all the way back in, was it The Wasteland? I don't even remember which book it first appeared in our podcast journey, but it's a story that I had never heard before Stephen King told it to me. So it's just a thing, like you look it up and you understand it's a really well-known expression with a lot of history, but I had never heard it.
Yeah, I've never heard it outside of Stephen King context.
Yeah. It's just fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. Jack decides to choose the mill hand and walks out into the hallway. And of course, Elroy is there. And I don't know if you remember this, Matt, but a couple weeks ago you said, what are these things? Werewolves? No, that's ridiculous. And I had to mute my microphone because I was laughing to myself because you were right, sort of. Because Elroy starts transforming into like a weregoat, or so. It has claws, but it also has hooves. What'd you think about this? Because this is wild.
Yeah, it's weird. This is the part I was talking about a minute ago where I was like, I can't even tell if he's really transforming or if this is like an illusion, or maybe he never looked like it, maybe he never was a human in the first place and it was just an illusion and he always looked like a monster. Or, also there's kind of the idea that this guy is somewhat related to the concept that became the low men. And so like this is maybe an early version of what a low man is this kind of creature. I don't know. It's I think it's meant to be difficult to pin down though, right? Because like you said, it doesn't slot neatly into like, it's just a werewolf.
No, definitely not. But yeah, I mean, I like it. This is a book that deals so much with duality, right? Like there are two worlds, there are twinners of people, and a were creature existing in this concept of something that is sometimes a monster and sometimes a human. I don't know. There's something that's delightfully perfect about that to me.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, you're right that what is happening here is so almost intentionally vague, because I don't know, like I never felt like the way this was described that I could just close my eyes and imagine like what a weregoat would look like. It's something more, because we definitely get the recurring beat of this thing has hooves, but it's also swiping with claws, right? So like, how does that work? Do the hooves have claws on them? How does that work?
He's got hoof claws. It's just, I think my mental image of this is like, it's not really any particular thing. It's just kind of a monster, kind of an animal monster.
Sure. I do like this part where we see that Elroy is talking to Jack, and Jack realizes that maybe he's not talking out loud anymore. I love this. Hearing with its ears or in his head, it didn't matter. The space between this world and that had shrunk from a universe to a mere membrane, which is a perfect way of describing what's happening here. We already kind of talked about this idea that we had these two very distinct worlds with this very distinct method of travel between the two of them flipping, and now we're seeing that difference shrink down as a thing from the other world has kind of invaded his.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes it feel like the option of easily escaping by flipping is a lot less of a certain and safe escape than we thought it was.
Sure, and I think there is something thematic to the idea that he escaped from the real world into the fantasy world to get away from the problems of the real world. He flipped back into the real world from the fantasy world, running from the problems in the fantasy world, and now he's flipped back to the fantasy world, running from a fantasy world problem. There's something very distinct in that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a pattern here, it's like maybe the next time he escapes, it's because the diligence is chasing him.
Yeah, but it doesn't quite line up.
Doesn't quite line up. But you could imagine him escaping from somebody with a sniper rifle, running from the territories.
Yeah. So before the werewolf can get him, Jack manages to get his magic potion out, and while wondering if Elroy could possibly follow him there, he takes a swig and flips over. And fortunately, no, Elroy does not come with him, although we see him later in the territory, so he can get there, just not right after Jack.
Yeah, right.
And that begins chapter 11, The Death of Jerry Bledsoe. We already kind of talked about how we're immediately greeted with this chapter and are like, what?
Yeah.
And so we didn't actually talk about this during the action sequence with Elroy, but during that whole thing, that when Jackie was 6 metronome is like going into overdrive, like every other paragraph while he's being attacked by this were monster is hitting these recurring beats of him, having this drilled into his head. And this chapter starts with like basically, and I don't know how well this worked in the audiobook for you, Matt, but basically the chapter ends mid-sentence and picks up at the second half of the sentence. So like the chapter starts, was 6 when it really started, Daddy, when the engines that eventually pulled him to Oatley and beyond began to chug away. So it's like this kind of very abrupt cutoff, and I don't know if that was lost in the audiobook at all.
I don't remember that happening, honestly. So it probably just went over my head.
Okay. See, I love audiobooks. There are definitely some things you lose for sure.
Yeah, especially when they're getting cute with formatting like this.
Yeah. So, but I think this does like serve a really important purpose at the beginning of this chapter, which is titled after a character we don't know yet and don't recognize. This first sentence of the chapter signifies to us that, hey, this is the one we're finally going to deal with whatever the hell the when I was 6 metronome like saying is. We're kind of signaling to you, the reader, don't worry, I'm finally going to explain it, because we said right away is like when I was 6, when it was started, when the engines that eventually pulled him to Oatley had begun to chug away, and then we go on to kind of illustrate how exactly that happened.
Yeah, how this is connected to things, and ultimately I found it to be a really nice setup and a really satisfying thing to include once it all clicked together and made sense. Because the book is cluing us into the idea that this is important, but that Jack is somehow unwilling or unable to complete the thought. And ultimately we realize that's because he's sort of in denial about it. He sort of doesn't want to process it for all sorts of complicated reasons, as we'll see.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, and he's, I mean, it feels weird to say it wasn't that long ago, but to a 12-year-old kid, it was half a lifetime away. So I can understand why he's maybe forgot this, and you're right that he's pushed it away. He has a lot of complicated feelings about this whole thing.
Yeah.
So we learn that when he was 6, Jack was playing with his toy taxi car behind the couch. And while he was behind the couch, his dad and Morgan Sloat are having a chat about the territories, about what Jack at the time called the daydreams. And what I love in this early part of the story, Matt, is that Jack, as a 6-year-old, just knows that Morgan is the bad guy, right? Like the way he describes him faking his enjoyment of the record that Jack's dad is putting on. And then there's this part right here where Morgan says, "Oh, I've learned a few things, Phil, but really, I'll never get over being grateful for you for showing all that to me. The two syllables of grateful filled with smoke and the sound of breaking glass." Like he just gets it in a way that either his father Phil, doesn't or is trying to overlook.
Yeah, I love this. I love the whole way that Jack's point of view is written in this section.
Yeah.
I mean, do you remember being little and getting like extreme bad vibes off of certain adults?
Yeah, I think so.
Because I was thinking about this as I was cogitating about this week's reading, and I, like, it's not like I can say like, and then I grew up and I learned that the guy I had bad vibes about was a serial killer, because that did not indeed happen. But I feel like this idea that young kids can pick up on this kind of stuff that that adults overlook has some validity to it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like generally as an adult, I feel like we got a lot going on, right? There's a lot of things we're kind of continuously thinking about and concerned about and dealing with the stressors of responsibility and everything you've got going on, that like just being in the moment and observant is not a thing that we do very often. And we've got the baggage of years of knowing people, right? So Phil has known Morgan Sloat for years and years and years up until this point. And so his image of him is not just how he's acting in the moment and how he's saying the words that he's saying right now, but it's also that combined with a long tail of backstory that he knows about this person. Whereas a young child, everything is new, right? And so like you're observing things in just a different kind of way, and you just like can see the way that this man is acting in a much purer way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That makes sense.
Yeah. So we see here that Morgan is trying to convince Phil that they could acquire some serious power if they bring modern conveniences from our world into the territories. This, by the way, allows Straub and King to give us some basic, baseline exposition about what the territories actually is, which is something that the book hasn't really dealt with so far. So we have Uncle Morgan here says, "Let me get some things straight," Uncle Morgan said. And Jackie saw the word straight as a pair of lines knotting around each other like snakes. They have magic like we have physics, right? We're talking about an agrarian monarchy using magic instead of science. Sure, Phil Sawyer said. And presumably they've gone on like that for centuries. Their lives have never changed very much, except for political upheavals. That's right.
Yeah. Once again, I just love the way that kid Jackie's perspective is written, where, we have these like almost intrusive visual representations of concepts, like lines knotting around each other like snakes. Which I mean, for me, it really captures the sense of being a little kid and kind of almost walking around in this half dream, half hallucination all the time. I just love it.
Especially because he's doing a thing that, I don't know, I used to do all the time, where like you're just playing somewhere that you can't be seen. Like he's just behind the couch, right? He's just behind the couch. His car rolled behind there and he crawled back there to get it and just playing with it. And we'll see like he ends up taking a nap in the middle of this conversation. And so he is almost literally half asleep in these moments where he's just kind of listening. And the only reason we see that he's paying really close attention is because he knows his dad is talking about the daydreams, and like it excites him because it's like this little secret that he and his dad is in on, And so that's why he's paying a little bit more attention. But yeah, no, I love to how it's written. Yeah. This is actually something I wanted to talk to you about though, because this is the kind of the second time we've had Morgan's beat of, we could, really strike it big if we bring modern conveniences of our world into the territories. And I have to be like, what do you mean by strike it big though, Morgan? Like, do you want to get like, you want money? Because first of all, they're already rich, right? Their agency is very, very well off. It doesn't seem like the territories is a place where like there's a lot of excess wealth around that you could like transfer over, bring a bunch of those stick things and get a bunch of money.
Right. It's the kind of situation where it's like, even if you were a king over there, your life would probably suck worse than, being a normal person over here. I don't know. I mean, I think he just has that kind of unremitting need for more power over people. And So even though it's kind of unclear what exactly he wants or what he would really get out of it, he's just like, I see an opportunity to dominate people and to take advantage of the situation. I have to take it, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's power for power's sake, that this is a way to get more people under his thumb, to get control over more people. And he needs to do it. He needs to do it.
And if you look at what has happened since then, it kind of seems like the Morgan, whatever his name is over on the territories side, he's like in charge now, effectively. And so that's presumably that's what this Morgan has set up, has kind of orchestrated. Mm-hmm. So that's
definitely. His name is Morgan of Orus, and he definitely seems, everyone's just playing a waiting game. And once the queen is officially dead, then he's already de facto in charge. But once the actual remaining source of power in this world is gone, then he'll just make things official.
Yeah, exactly.
But Phil doesn't seem game for the idea of direct intervention into the territories, right? And bringing electricity to the masses is not something that he seems like he wants to be in on. And here, I think, is where we learn something very important about how Earth and the territories interact. We're told by Phil that what happens in one place affects the other. So like walking 1 mile in the territories is like walking 5 here. Doing one small thing over there can make one big thing happen over here. We hear about our chapter's titular Jerry Bledsoe, although we don't learn what happened to him at this point. We deal with that a little bit. We also hear that a regicide that happened in the territories might have kicked off World War II on our world. So I guess I just want to ask you generally about the choice to do this tied interaction between these two worlds in this kind of way. So like what are the territories metaphorically if we have this understanding of this tied interaction?
So honestly, the first answer that my dumb brain returned to your question is that it's the world of vibes. And that was just so dumb. I just had to share it. But I think what I meant by this thought was like, it's like a shadow world for like intentions and feelings and good and evil of our world. You do evil in this world and that evil becomes stylized and exaggerated and concentrated in the territories. And alternately, you could say that it's a kind of condensed version of our world, both spatially and metaphorically.
Yeah, I like that. I think we were talking about this before we started recording, but one of the things that I'm still struggling with in this book, with just the chapters that we have read so far, is the theme of the story. What is the overall theme of this? What is the book trying to say? And I don't think we've quite gotten to one yet. So looking at the territories as metaphor, so zooming out and saying, what metaphorically does this mean, and what does it have to do with the story we're telling, and the why of the story we're telling? We're not quite there yet still. So these are questions that I'm asking you to kind of challenge you with, knowing full well that we don't have a clear answer yet.
Right, because the answer I just gave, like, I think it's something along those lines, but I don't see how that connects to the story that we're telling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and this is just the thing to say, like, pretty much every book club book that we cover where there's like a fantasy element, the fantasy element is a metaphor for whatever the theme of the story is. It's operating on that level, and I'm sure the same is going to be the case here. I just don't quite see how it connects yet.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. Yeah, so maybe we'll find out in a few weeks. I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we rejoin Jack in the territories, having just remembered this whole conversation between Sloat and his father. But of course, he remembers the name Jerry Bledsoe, and it's on the tip of his tongue, but he hasn't quite gotten to, the who or what killed Jerry Bledsoe and what that could possibly mean. But I want to talk to you about Jack's reaction to the territories this time around, because last time he was here, he was chased away by some horrible, horrible monsters. And like we said, this time he's here because he was chased. So I think we see automatically that he's kind of approaching the territories from a bit of a different angle. And a lot of what we're going to do for the next couple chapters is show, hey, this place is not so bad. It's not so bad.
Yeah, I think this whole week is basically making us totally see how young Jackie could have found the territories to be a good place, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So Jack walks through a small town, the territory's version of Oatley, which doesn't have a spooky bridge with some sort of monster thing in it. He can't help but feel like something's off here when he looks around. The horizon looks wrong, but he's not sure of what. And then we get this part here that I just love. And then he suddenly realized, was it. In front of the houses were no poles, no wiring, no TV antennas complicated the sky, no tall wooden poles marched the length of the Western Road, because in the territories there was no electricity. So this is great because it ties perfectly to what he was remembering about the conversation between Sloat and his father, right? But I also just love this because, I love electricity. We're talking to people right now because of electricity. It's great. It's one of the greatest things we've ever harnessed in the history of mankind. But I think above ground wires are some of the most disgusting things in the world. And like, you just think about it, like every viewpoint you have on the planet, basically, you're going to have a telephone pole with some wires in it. It's just like everywhere. It's everywhere. And I hate it. I hate it so much. We need to bury all these damn wires.
That's funny. Yeah. There are high tension wires near where I take my walks. I definitely appreciate having modern amenities, but they don't look so good. Although sometimes I can flip my brain over into the mode of being like, I live in the Blade Runner future. And it's like, like, are you ever out walking and you see like an airplane or something and you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, I do that with random stuff sometimes, where you just have those like these things, these amenities that you get so used to in your life, and then you just take a second and be like, it's fucking amazing that we can do this. Like almost every time I get on an airplane, which is a lot because my dad was a pilot, I do have this moment of, we are in a metal tube hurtling through the sky at hundreds of miles an hour, and it's just staying up.
Yeah.
And we're in control of it, and we can land it, and we can do this safely enough that we've commercialized it. It's just fucking wild.
I feel like the older I get, the more I get like awed by these things, even though airplanes were totally a thing even when I was a kid.
Yeah. No, it is incredible. And yeah, I mean, like I said, electricity, love it. Big fan, huge fan of electricity.
Fan, yeah.
But I will say, like, the ugliest thing in the world is when you have this wilderness, right? Like this beautiful wilderness, and then like right down the center of it is just like carved out for these super towers running wire. It's just like the grossest thing.
Have you ever seen those cell towers that they kind of dress up to look kind of like trees?
No, I haven't.
It looks. I wish that they would just make them out of ugly metal, honestly, because it's so unconvincing. Yeah, I've seen a couple of these here and there.
We just really need wireless electricity. When are we going to make that, Matt?
They should have just listened to Tesla. He knew. He knew, man.
He did. Damn you, Edison.
Damn you, Edison. So back to the idea of Jack noticing the lack of electric wiring. Like, my feeling was, the reason why he noticed the lack of electric wiring was really because his brain was prompting him to think about Jerry Bledsoe. Like that was the logic there, No,
you're absolutely right. I actually love how this whole sequence is written, because kind of what we're doing is following someone's train of thought in the way that the brain works, which is almost completely illogical sometimes, because we had this constant refrain of when I was six, and then we finally go into that memory in which they mention a person named Jerry Bledsoe, who we'll later learn was an electrician who was electrocuted to death. And so he comes out of that memory not remembering who Bledsoe is yet, but remembering electricity in some weird way. And then he notices the wires aren't there. And then his ability to notice that the wiring isn't there is what cues his memory to go, oh, Jerry Bledsoe was an electrician. And so like that's such an accurate way of describing how weird the brain is sometimes, and how it makes those connections that you like sound not like. Have you ever like been talking with someone and then you just do a complete non sequitur and they look at you like you're crazy, and then you have to go back and be like, no, let me explain to you how I got to this thing I just said from the thing we were actually talking about. And it makes logical sense when you pace it all out, but like your brain just does it. And it's wild.
Yeah. All the time.
I don't know. Like, I just think, like, you've talked over the course of this project how much you think King like gets human psychology in a lot of ways. And I think this is another example of how he just understands, and describes the way the brain works sometimes.
Not only describes how it works, but like conveys it in a convincing and clear way on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I feel like if I had this same thought of like, okay, I'm going to have this character kind of sneak up on realizing this thing for himself.
Yeah.
It would have been it's very hard to actually do. Like, it's one thing to say like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's another thing to convey it in a way where you get that that's what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. So we get to see what happened here. One day, Jerry was at his father's office dealing with some wiring issues when suddenly everything goes off and he finds himself dead, burnt to a crisp. An absolute freak accident that no one is responsible for, unless you happen to be Phil Sawyer and Morgan Sloat, who just happened to be over in the territories that day when it happened, possibly at that same office location over there. So we get this line that kind of finishes our chapter here. Jerry Bledsoe, who plays those changes, Daddy? Jack made his feet move until he had gone half an hour without seeing another of the little thatched cottages. Unfamiliar stars and unfamiliar patterns lay all over the sky above him, messages in a language he could not read. So as much as like, the territories is seen as this kind of beautiful place here, he's just come to a realization here that it is not sitting well with him. And so automatically the unfamiliarity of this place kind of comes back to the forefront.
Yeah. And I also have to say, like, the horror level of Jerry Bledsoe's death is extremely high.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's probably the most kind of objectively awful thing that we've seen in this book so far.
Definitely.
Yeah. And also, yeah, I mean, I think in my mind, he didn't want to think about this because it would require acknowledging that his dad probably got somebody killed.
Yeah, definitely. I love that line that is repeated over and over again. Who plays those changes, Daddy?
Mm-hmm.
Because like that's not a common expression, right? But it works here in context.
Mm-hmm. Right. I guess. Well, yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Is that like actually? I think that's a song, right?
Like a specific song.
I don't know. Like, I don't know who plays those. Like, that's got. I feel like that's a line from something because it just, in context, it's a weird way of saying, like, who pays the cost. Like, who is the one making the change? Like who's the one responsible for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a reference to something. I just don't know what specifically it's a reference to, other than like jazz musicians, basically, right? Like just the idea of who's leading this piece of music, who's the one making the decisions, like you said.
Yeah, I guess this goes back to the music that the record his father was playing at the beginning of the chapter, right?
That's the overt connection. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I just looked it up on the internet while you were talking, and as happens sometimes when I try to look up stuff about any Stephen King book, the first entry it's from this book,
from the book that we're talking about. Yeah.
So I'm looking up at the chapter, and it's like the record is called Daddy Plays the Horn that they're listening to. So who plays those changes, Daddy? I think makes a lot of sense.
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. It's a fun expression. It's like one of those King invention of speech that doesn't make a lot of sense, but when you hear it over and over again, you start to get it, and it takes on an ominous tone to it for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so we move on to chapter 12, Jack Goes to the Market. And so we learn here that Jack spends the night in a haystack and then resumes walking along the Western Road. This is when he discovers an interesting fact, Matt. The people of the territories do not speak English. They're speaking some other language, but like his clothes and his coins, his speech transforms while it is in the territories. We mentioned last week that the transformation of physical objects was indeed something unique to this book versus the other Dark Tower novels, because we don't see that happen to anyone coming over to Midworld in those books. But the change of speech is something that's kind of implied to be happening in the Dark Tower. Like, I don't think King ever comes out and directly says it, but we have the high speech and the low speech, and we have this idea that I think I remember Eddie talking about how like he understands speech that he shouldn't understand because he's over in Midworld. Yeah,
that's definitely in there. Yeah, totally.
So besides, being a neat little fact here. Can you think of like an actual reason to include this in the story?
Well, I mean, not. I mean, on the plot level, it makes sense that number one, it makes sense that a different world would have a different language.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the part that's surprising is not that they have a different language. The part that's surprising is that Jack can magically speak the language. And then you ask, can everyone who visits the territories magically speak territoryese? And can anybody who visits Earth from the territories magically speak English? Like, is this something we can count on? I don't know. These are more questions than answers. And then also, I don't really have a reason why it would be thematically the case that there would be like a language barrier that isn't a language barrier. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's fair. We don't know, right? Like there's so much we don't know about the flipping because we've only seen it from Jack's perspective. So we don't know if he's special in this way or not. I mean, we've been told specifically that he's special, right? Because he doesn't have a twinner. His twinner died when he was very young. So we don't know for sure, but I think you're right. It introduces the possibility of there being more stuff going on right here.
Yeah.
So we see here that Jack gets picked up by a family heading into the market, and we get to interact with some of the everyday denizens of the territories, which is something we haven't really gotten to do so far. So we have Mr. and Mrs. Henry and their 3-year-old son, Jason. He tells these people a territories-ized version of his traveling Jack story that he was telling people over in our world. And I love this moment where Jack muses on the fact that these people have no idea what California is, and they just kind of accept that. Like the line here is, they live in a mystery, he thought. When you live in a mystery, you don't question a village simply because you never heard of it. California doesn't sound any wilder than a place named All Hands.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah. I mean, as I was thinking about this, my first thought was that we all live in a mystery. Nobody really knows what dark matter is. Nobody knows how money works. Quantum physics implies that the universe might be constantly splitting into parallel realities. You do a special little dance with the pair of humans, and then a new human results 9 months later. It's a fucking insane world. We're just totally blasé about it. And I think the thing about the territories is you kind of can't be blasé about the territories. It's all just too extreme.
Yeah, no, I you're right. You're definitely right. I did look at it from a slightly different angle than you, though.
Sure.
Because, I think the thing I was thinking about is we were talking last week about hitchhiking, which is a thing that time showed we were completely wrong about. But this idea, the one thing we were talking about, this idea is we have all this information now. And that's something that Jack notes in here as well. Like, in the world we live in, we might not know the name of every small town that exists in the world, right? But if you say, oh, I'm going to blah, blah, blah town, it's in North Texas, like people are going to know generally where that is. And so it is a world where some of the mystery of the world has been drained out of it based on the amount of knowledge we have. Like these people are people that kind of live in just a veil of ignorance because they don't have access to information about other places. And there is something kind of freeing in that they're not questioning of, like, I don't know. I feel like if I pick up someone hitchhiking, which I would never do, as we talked about, and they say they're from a place I don't recognize, I feel like my first question is going to be, well, where is that? Whereas their first question is, oh, I never heard of that place. That's cool. I'm fine with it. And I feel like this is a difference between, like living in mystery versus living with knowledge is a very different thing, and it changes behavior.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the part of me the thing that I think about is like whenever whenever I'm traveling and if I'm in a new city, and somebody references a place, of course I'm not surprised to hear the name of that place. Like I'm because I'm like, I've never heard of any of these places.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like, I'm surprised in the sense that everything here is new to me. So I'm just like, oh, okay, sure. Whatever. But if somebody names like a suburb of Denver and I've never heard of it, I'm like, well, what are you talking about? So like, I think, but like this is their world. And so, if you're in their world and you mention a place that's, not it can't possibly be that far away because he says that he's traveling there, right? So the fact that they're just that incurious about it, I think you're right that it's like that they're used to not understanding, they're used to not being able to understand the world around them.
Yeah, I mean, like that's. I feel like the world I live in, when I don't know something, I need to know it automatically, you know? And because I have access to it, I will find it out. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but like just the idea that like when I'm sitting watching a movie and I recognize an actor and I'm like, who's that? I know that person. Where are they from? I immediately pull up IMDb in the middle of the movie and try to figure out where I know this actor from. It's like when you get used to living in a world where there are no mysteries anymore, you just get used to, you just want to know all the things. Because if you reckon, like in a world without mystery, if you don't know something, you're like, well, that can't be. This is a world without mystery. I should know everything. And I do feel like generally this is also another good metaphor for like the transition from childhood to adulthood, right? Like the more you understand of the world, the less mystery the world has. Like I remember being a kid and just the world was this giant place where anything was possible. And I'm not saying like it's not that, but like as we learn the more of the borders of what our world is, that mystery goes away a little bit. And so these are people living in kind of a storybook world where that never goes away.
Yeah, the magic kind of goes away too. Like
yeah,
which I think is part of it because we know, it's funny. Sloat and Jack's dad talked about the idea that the territories have magic instead of industry, and it's like, man, we have not seen very much magic, honestly. Like we've seen a couple of really minor kind of specific instances of what is clearly magic, but it's not like they're getting a ton out of it. I guess I bring this up to say like it's funny how minor the magic is actually in a world that is that runs on magic basically. I don't know.
No, you're right. I mean, like this whole sequence is Jack, going to market with a farmer who's there to sell his crop, and he's just going to interact with a bunch of mundane people, just trying to make it through their world. And it's really not until the very, very end of the section that he sees a man with wings jump off a tower, and like magic comes back into the world again a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's like, maybe that shows the state of the world, that it has, perhaps due to Sloat's influence, it has had a little bit of the magic kind of sucked out of it in a way.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
All right, so things are going well in the wagon, but Mr. Henry has been listening, and he has one question for Jack, who came from the East, whose father died. Was he political? And when Jack fails to answer that question, Henry kicks him out of the ride. He doesn't want to deal with any of that political mumbo jumbo. It gets him in nothing but trouble.
It reminds me of how in Eyes of the Dragon, the small folk were constantly like, "Oh, this is above my pay grade. Only fools get embroiled in the affairs of royals," and they would just back off.
Yeah, I think it goes a long way of showing like how dangerous everyday life is in the territories right now. Like we've abstractly been told that there's this dangerous political situation going on. The queen is sick and dying, and we have Morgan Sloat and his men kind of waiting in the rafters. But I think this shows just how far it's gone, that a person, will kick someone out of their wagon for just possibly having something to do with any of that situation in any kind of way, like he's just so concerned about getting connected to what's going on in any way that he's going to immediately put a stop to it. Like, I mean, it's very distinct here where he says, like, Jack starts talking about his father and he's like, I don't want to know a thing about your father. I don't want to know it. Shut up. I don't want to hear it. Just go away. Go away. I don't want you near my family. Right. It shows that, like, this and the next chapter are two showing the serenity and the beauty and the otherworldliness of the territories, but that doesn't take away this, where it's a very tense situation here where people this far removed from the problem are still very conscious of the problem, and it's changing their behavior.
Yeah, I mean, the level of danger that must be around if he's really that worried about just like driving into town and maybe somebody sees this kid get off of his cart and that would actually bring danger to his family. Like that just tells you how bad things are. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so that chapter ends, and we move on to chapter 13, The Men in the Sky. This chapter is so interesting to me, Matt, because Jack heads into town, into the market, and has basically, a good time. He learns how the currency works. He gets himself some delicious meat. I love the detail here that he's like aware that the meat guy ripped him off and is kind of a general jerk to him, as if to say, like, we don't want to show you that a place is too good. It's not all good, but it's not all bad either.
Yeah, it's almost like there has to be a balance. Like the first vendor scams him, and then the second vendor gives him a magical gift, and balance is maintained. Which made me further think, like, maybe the bad consequences, like people getting electrocuted, are caused by imbalances. Like if you do too much of something that is not like being karmically offset, then there's like a spillage effect in one world or the other. I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps. I like that. So yeah, I think that rug salesman you mentioned, that second vendor, I think I want to talk about him a little bit, because we do have this definite delineation between meat salesman who treated Jack like a jerk, rug salesman who sees Jack is looking at a picture of a rug with the queen sewn into it, and this summons in him this profound sense of sadness. The rug salesman immediately sees that and is kind to him. He shows him a mirror to kind of, jokingly show, look how sad you look. And we learn here that this is a magic mirror, Matt, a mirror that changes your reflection based on your mood. And the rug salesman decides to give the mirror to Jack after seeing, how happy it makes him. We also learn that Jack remembers having one of these at one time. Nothing more there. But what I wanted to say here is, like, this is another instance. We've been doing this book for 3 weeks, and each of these 3 weeks we've had another random stranger giving our main character another magical token, right? We have the shark tooth / guitar pick that he got from Speedy. We have the coin he got from the captain of the guard. And now we have the magic mirror from the rug salesman. So, I mean, obviously this is so profoundly Campbellian and hero's journey-esque, but specific to this book, I think it's just showing how key the people that Jack has met so far are to how his journey is going. This is very important, right?
Yeah. I think that's true. I do wonder, like, what's gonna come of this mirror, right? But yeah, I mean, definitely though, it's Campbellian in the sense that something will, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's like in a book called The Talisman, where we've already kind of defined by our title the concept of magical totems that are key to the plot. Like, we have one big one, but we also have these small ones that we're continuing to get. And no, you're absolutely right that there's no idea, there's no even setup that we've seen for how these are going to pay off in any kind of way. But it is definitely a recurring motif that he meets a person, they give him a magical object, and we move on.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah.
I do love, just talking about the conversation between the rug salesman and Jack. Like, they are very pleasant to each other, and they're like doing this kind of rhyme game witticisms back and forth to each other that I was delighted by. It was so fun to read.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was some of my favorite. Just it made you happy. Like, I think that's important because everything's been like a huge drag for quite a while, actually. Jack's been going through all these horrible ordeals and trials, right? The road of trials. So just like somebody showing him just like a basic normal level of friendliness and kindness is really appreciated.
Yeah, it made you happy, and I think that is because it makes Jack happy.
Right.
You're absolutely right. So all in all, Jack has a pretty nice time. He sees a creepy 2-headed parrot as well. Is Flag here with
Must be.
He gets a fresh apple and some of the most delicious milk he's ever tasted. I do think you're right that we kind of talked about this, but King and Straub seem to be aware here that a lot of this book and a lot of Jack's time in the territories has been dark and depressing, and they realize that we need a little bit of a different tone. Jack went in expecting it to be a paradise, the world of his daydreams as a child. He quickly found out it wasn't that, but it can be a beautiful place too. And we need to see the beauty of the place, and we need to see Jack's happiness as well. We need some differentiation in tone and mood a little bit here.
Yeah, we need a break. And also, I do feel like this might be touching upon what the themes of the story are going to be, because Jack's, we commented on the beginning of the book was this like dreary, terrible depiction of the real world. It was almost like fantastically dreary. But the thing is, the real world also contains beauty. And so, are we going to move toward Jack recognizing the beauty of just the simple beauty of reality?
Sure.
I don't quite. I feel like I have like a couple puzzle pieces, and I'm missing, most of the puzzle pieces. But I think somewhere in that direction is where we're headed.
We'll see. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we have this part here. It's a little long, but I wanted to read it for you because I think it's worth talking about. Jack was having an experience of remarkable sensory impact, seeing and hearing and smelling things which were brand new to him, while other sensory input to which he had grown utterly accustomed was missing for the first time. In many ways, he was a remarkably sophisticated child, brought up in a Los Angeles family where his father had been an agent and his mother a movie actress. It would have been odder if he had been naive, but he was still just a child, sophisticated or not, and that was undeniably his gain, at least in a situation such as this. That lonely day's journey across the grasslands would surely have produced sensory overload, perhaps even a pervasive sense of madness and hallucination in an adult. An adult would have been scrabbling for Speedy's bottle, probably with fingers too shaky to grasp it very successfully, an hour west of the market town, maybe less. In Jack's case, the wallet passed almost completely through his conscious mind and into his subconscious. So when he blissed out entirely and began to weep, he was really unaware of the tears, except as a momentarily doubling of vision which he had attributed to sweat, and thought only, geez, I feel good. It should feel spooky out here with no one around, but it doesn't. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, right? With King and his understanding of, the naivete of a child and the new experience of a child and how they see things differently. And I love this idea, not only that a child experiences things differently, but like textually better, right? That an adult in the same situation would have just lost it and run away from it. But a kid, because everything's new to a kid, can handle the newness of this world.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I thought this was incredibly well written and moving. And I think here we see, the highs of the territories are so high that they sort of balance out the lows.
Yeah.
There's this idea of balance that we've talked about before, right? Like the territories in the real world are in balance, and then there's also a balance to be struck here between these extremes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I love the idea that it makes him cry, and he doesn't even realize it, right? Like it's so beautiful, it's so new, it's so perfect and wonderful in every way that it moves him to tears, and he isn't even conscious of that. I don't know. You're right that the writing here is really great, and I think really sells you on what this place is like. And I think this is, we talked about why this is important for Jack. I think again, it's important for us because we need to understand, like, we don't want everything to be terrible all the time, right? Like, we don't need this tone of depression and sadness the whole book. We need moments of cheerfulness. Like I think at one point Jack like realizes, he's like, the thing I feel right now is cheerful. And I can't remember the last time I felt cheerful.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's really important. Also, there's this like impressionistic tone to the writing, which I guess I just really appreciate. It's not something that you often get in novels, where like it's almost poetry, where it's kind of trying to capture this feeling of like, I don't know, it's rare is the thing, but every once in a while, and by that I mean like maybe once a year or less, you'll have an experience. Maybe you're in a new place, and you're just walking around and you're just very aware of like, wow, this is awesome, and it's a sensory experience, but it's a sensory experience that kind of goes into your brain the way this is described as happening to Jack, and it affects your mood. At least that's happens to me sometimes. Maybe.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think it happens less and less as you get older because you see less new things,
Yeah, I think you're right.
So cheerful Jack looks around as he walks, and he sees a tall tower. It's not a dark one, though. Okay. Not a dark one. and he sees men climbing this tall tower. He sees what he thinks first is a man falling off, and it almost spoils his cheerful mood. But what he realizes later is jumping. These men have wings, and they are flying. And I think this is important. The important part of the scene is not the, oh, cool, there are winged people in the territories, I guess, because as Jack says here, we don't actually know if these are like natural wings, like if these are winged people or if they're wearing some kind of apparatus. But I think the important part to me is Jack sees them work, that flying takes work, and in that work he sees pain, and he goes on this kind of tangent, remembering when he observed ballet dancers who hurt themselves for their craft, for their beauty, but the result of all that pain is something absolutely beautiful. I love the writing here, Matt. It says Jack had suddenly realized that these dancers were not just earning a living. They were killing themselves. Most of all, he remembered their expressions, all that exhausted concentration, all that pain, but transcending the pain, or at least creeping around its edges, he had seen joy. Joy was unmistakably what that look was, and it had scared Jack because it had seemed inexplicable. What kind of person could get off by subjecting himself or herself to such steady, throbbing, excruciating pain?
Yeah, this is very interesting. I don't quite know what to make of this idea yet. Like maybe that things worth having or worth sacrificing for is my first thought, but I just don't know how it all fits together.
Yeah, I think definitely there's some of that, and that the acknowledgement of Jack, this understanding that I think ballet and these, it's just a perfect image of this, because it is, like there, it takes so much work, right? And it hurts. So that's okay, I am not a ballet dancer. I don't know very many ballet dancers, but everything I understand about it is so hard on your body. It takes so much work. Even like the toe shoes, like you're just destroying your toes over and over and over again. And yet the final product is indeed something beautiful. Watching ballet is a kind of a transcendent experience, like he's having right here, where it's just, you're seeing something you've never quite seen before, and the beauty and the grace of it is incredible. But underneath all that, there's incredible pain. And I do wonder if this is, I don't mean to keep beating the same drum, but to go back to our metaphor of a child growing up, is learning that these incredible things, these incredible beautiful things that we can do and we can make, we can accomplish, take a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff going on behind that we don't see yet. Like, I mean, my example of this is just, because I've always loved movies, is just this idea of like, when you're a child, you watch a movie and you don't understand how the thing was actually made. It's just this thing, and it's awesome and you love it, but like, you don't understand the blood, sweat, and tears that went into making the thing. And part of getting older is getting to see that. And I think in the scene that I just read, he's younger, and he's so young that the idea that someone would do this for their art form is so illogical to him. He just can't process it at all.
Yeah. I love that. That's great. I'm processing that. I think that's, I still don't know how to connect that into the overarching theme of the story, but I really like everything you just said there. Yeah. And anyway, Scott, that the way that the movie is made is that there's like the little men inside the VHS cassette. Oh, and then you push it into the machine, and then you can see what's happening on the screen.
They're just acting it out for you.
I mean, that's what I knew was happening when I was a kid. I don't know what you knew was happening when you were a kid.
What happened when we switched to DVDs? Did we fire all those?
I mean, I got older, is what happened.
I do think, to kind of throw a wrinkle on this whole thing, though, the next thing he says here is, and it's all just a game. He thought suddenly and felt sure of it. A game. Or maybe even not that. Maybe it was only practice for a game. The way all that sweat and trembling exhaustion in the Wilshire loft that day had just been practice. Practice for a show that only a few people would probably care to attend, which would probably close quickly. So, it's not even blood, sweat, and tears for great art. It's blood, sweat, and tears for the possibility of not great art, or the possibility of art that might be great, but that no one will ever see. I'm again, as a creator stating this in both Straub and King, you gotta wonder, like, you and I have talked a lot about, and okay, I'm about to say something. I'm not saying what we're doing in this podcast is art at all. It's not. I like what we do and I think we're good at it. It's not art. But like, we've talked about how we love doing this so much that we would do it if no one was listening. And for many years we did do that, right? And I think this is part of it. This sense of, it's incredible pain to accomplish something great, and it doesn't have to be for other people. It can just be for you.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, the artists that I know, I know a woman who puts a ton of energy into playing a stringed instrument in an orchestra. I mean, it's not like it's a world-class orchestra. I don't think she'd be offended if I said that. Like, it's a small, it's a small orchestra. That's not important. Like, what's important is not like, oh, we're going to sell out Carnegie Hall. It's about the music. It's about doing it for its own sake, doing it because it's almost because it's challenging, and because it's beautiful. But of course, it's really hard to play a stringed instrument, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh God. I can't imagine. To your point, though, what's this got to do with Jack's journey to get a talisman?
Right.
And yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, at least not yet. But I mean, there's something we could squint at and say, like, maybe like the journey is going to be filled with a lot of pain, but it's a lot of work. Like, he's literally on the road of trials right now,
Yeah.
And maybe he needs to recognize that this is less about his mother and more about him. Like, it's because let's pretend that in this metaphor, his mother is the audience, right? He's going through all these trials and tribulations for his mother, but maybe it should be more about him and his experiences.
Yeah, that's one thing that occurred to me today is like, man, this is quite an ordeal to be going through, right? And it's like, well, it's to save his mom. And I'm like, how many people in the real world would go through an ordeal like this to save their own mom? And like that, maybe that sounds cynical. Like, we would all like to believe that we would do something like this for our own mom. And maybe we would, I don't know. But like, this is quite extreme is all I'm saying. And so the fact that he just, I mean, he does refuse the call for a minute there, but now he's all in on it. Right. So
yeah,
I don't know.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's especially a child to like, turn to one of your kids tomorrow and say, you got to save my life. Don't actually do this, Matt. This is a terrible idea. I'm dying. You got to save my life. Please go out on your own and walk across the country, and you'll definitely save my life. Like, the trials he's going through are scary, right? Like, there's a lot going on here. That the tunnel that he went through, Oatly, like, there's some scary shit going on here that the person of his age is not even necessarily ready to fully be facing yet. And he's motivated by saving his mother, but also, like, we can already see he's changing and growing and learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, we got this passage right here. His time of innocence was fast approaching its end, and if pressed, even Jack would have reluctantly agreed that he felt such an end approaching. A boy couldn't go on the road for long, couldn't go through many experiences such as the ones he had gone through in Oatly, and expect to remain innocent. But in those moments as he stood looking into the sky, innocence seemed to surround him, like the young fisherman during his brief moment of epiphany in the Elizabeth Bishop poem. Everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. I don't have anything to say there other than I just find that beautiful. Like, that innocence surrounds you when you look at the sky. So when you see people flying through the sky, you realize perhaps how little of the world you actually understand, right? Like, what? There's a man flying and he's hurting himself to do it. And it's beautiful, but it's painful. And I recognize both of those things. And I'm still not yet able to square them in my head.
Yeah. I mean, I love that as well. I mean, almost this entire chapter, this entire The Men in the Sky chapter is like this impressionistic, very, very, very internal. Things aren't really happening. He's seeing things and he's reacting to them and having this like transcendent almost spiritual experience of being in the territories. It's not until the very end of the chapter that anything plot related really happens.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just really beautiful. It's a really unusual chapter. It's really beautiful. I feel like I'm going to be reflecting back on this chapter a lot as we move forward.
Sure. No, yeah, I agree with that. I think books, like, this is why I like novels so much, because novels can spend this time to just live in this chapter for a little bit. Like imagine a TV show having a whole episode where Jack just like walks along a path, like experiences beauty, sees a couple people fly, and is like, whoa, and then end of episode. Like, we don't have time for that kind of stuff in other formats of storytelling.
Yeah.
But in this moment of cheerfulness and peace and clarity, Jack finally puts the pieces together, the things that maybe you and I and the rest of the audience has already figured out. Morgan Sloat, and perhaps his father, was doing something over in the territories the day Jerry Bledsoe died, and it echoed and killed the man. So we once again reinforce that actions have consequences. And in this perfect moment of realization, Jack suddenly sees Morgan Sloat's diligence coming down the western road, with our good were friend Elroy riding in the captain's seat. The time for our peaceful walk in the territory is over, so Jack walks off the road, takes a drink, and flips back over to our world. And that's the end of the chapter. What did you think of this ending? I think, we talked about this remarkably transcendental, peaceful moment, and then it ends in this rush of kind of fear and action here at the end.
I think it's a very dramatically well orchestrated moment because, all that's really happened is he remembers some information, and then there's a wagon nearby. Like it's not an intrinsically dramatic situation, but it's
Sure.
what I mean is it's written in a way that emphasizes that makes that emphasizes the punch of this remembering remembering the connection of this thing and why it matters, and then punctuating that with, oh no, the diligence is here. He's being chased, it seems like, and I don't know. It's a great coda to this really interesting and unique chapter.
Yeah, and I love the 1-2 punch of, oh no, actions have consequences over here, and then he flips, and we'll see later the consequence of that choice to do that.
Yeah.
So we move into our final chapter of the week, chapter 14, titled Buddy Parkins. Once again, a thing that has no meaning to us in the moment when we read it, but will quickly have meaning a little bit later in the chapter.
Yeah.
But the opening of this chapter, Matt, Jack flips into our world and is immediately greeted by the harsh realities of it. It smells, it stinks, there's gasoline, other nameless poisons is what the text says. So here's where I have to ask you, is this an environmental book? Like, is the point of this book that the territories are better because our world has all this evil commerce and development, et cetera, and the territories are pure? Is that what the book is saying?
I kind of want to say not really. I mean, I'm beginning to see the territories as a shadow or reflection, or, like I said earlier, a condensation of our world, and it's worse than our world in some ways, and it's better than others. It doesn't have environmental pollution, but maybe there are other sorts of pollution, you could say.
Yeah, I mean, there's like Morgan Sloat, who's about to be the leader of the whole place. Yeah,
right. I mean, this chapter in particular, you could say, does kind of hammer on kind of the dystopian elements of pollution and technology a little bit. But I don't think it's as simple as just saying like it's not Fern Gully.
Yeah, and I mean, King has always kind of had a technology versus nature element in his stories, right? I think the Dark Tower was big on that, right? The old ones were these people that invented this kind of incredible technology that took over where magic left off. And the consequences of that were pretty dire. That's what causes the beam to start to fail and causes a lot of the problems that we see in the Dark Tower series. So he's always had that kind of bent to him, but I think that's a very like Stephen King was a 60s hippie kind of thing, like nature, peace and love, man,
Yeah.
So I mean, I agree generally that this is not the overarching point of the story. I think there are good things about our world and bad things, and I think there are some very good things and bad things about the territories, and those things are different for sure. They're very different.
Yeah. I also feel like King has always refused to be simplistic about how he
Yeah.
depicts technology, because like I always think about the robots in the Dark Tower and how,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for a minute you think like, oh yeah, the robots are evil because we got Blaine and we got what the fuck's that guy's name? The other evil robot. But then you realize there's other robots that aren't so straightforwardly evil, and then you realize like, oh, they're just I don't know. It's
Talking about
complex.
Andy the messenger
Andy,
robot.
yeah.
God, you don't even
Andy.
remember the Dark
And
Tower.
it's been weeks and weeks, Scott, and many other functions, Scott.
So Jack heads to see the consequences of his action in the territories, and King and Straub do something they've yet to do outside of that one interlude chapter we've had. They cut away from Jack. Instead, we move to quote-unquote many days later, and we are in the head of our titular character, Buddy Parkins, who is a salesman in Ohio, and this is the latest man to be giving traveling Jack a ride. So before we get into the details of Buddy Parkins and everything, why do you think they do this? Why is the decision made to kind of cheat a little bit and cut away our point of view in a way that they haven't in the book so far?
A few things. I guess for me, it boils down to the idea that there's a benefit to seeing a character from the outside, especially when they're undergoing a lot of stress or undergoing a kind of gradual deterioration like Jack is.
Sure.
We normalize whatever our POV character is experiencing. We just kind of accept it. And so providing a third party to give an objective viewpoint on the character can really shock us into consciously noticing things like, oh man, Jack kind of looks like shit. Smells like a barnyard.
Sure.
And then I think the second reason specific to this circumstance is that it would be kind of boring to start a chapter with like a POV of your character ruminating on something that's upsetting them. Because I mean, we honestly, we just jumped out of a chapter that was kind of like I said, a very internal chapter. A lot of ruminating was happening, and it worked there. But if we just jump from rumination into rumination, then it's just like, okay, I'm getting bored now. Whereas now we're showing Jack ruminating from the outside via this other character's point of view, and that makes us wonder, like, oh, what's up? What's eating Jack? What's wrong? Like, did we miss something? And then we become curious, and thus we're actually interested. And it's intrinsically interesting when we find out what's going on.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I like that a lot. I think it does really help because one of the other things it does is that Jack was very proud of his acting ability and his impression ability and his ability to tell these stories to these people that absolutely convinced them he was who he said he was and kept them from asking too many questions and allowed him to get the rides. And we see through Buddy Perkins that this story is actually not holding up very well, right? Like that his accent is wrong. He smells like a farm. And most importantly, I think Buddy looks at him and sees this anxiety, this cloud of worry that seemed to hang over the boy. So you're absolutely right that we get to see Jack from a new angle, and we also get to see that this strategy that he had to make it through America is not working anymore, and it's because of how he's dealing with events that we don't quite understand just yet.
Right, like it.
So we see he's gripping tightly to a newspaper from Angola, New York, where he last flipped over. And on that newspaper, we see a freak earthquake went off the same day that he flipped over, and it killed 5 people at a construction site with 2 more injured. Jack, of course, blames himself for this. We see, once again, that recurring beat of who plays the changes, Jackie Boy. And he knows who plays the changes. He says, it's me. And the guilt of that death seems to follow him everywhere. Throughout the rest of this chapter, he'll be dealing with the guilt of that moment.
I do find myself wondering if it's actually true. Like he believes that he is the cause of deaths, and that's why he's being cautious. But like, couldn't it have been, I don't know, like the rumbling of the diligence that's chasing him, or literally anything else? I mean, I get that it's a very unusual occurrence, and I see why he believes it. But I don't know why I'm finding myself skeptical here. But I don't know.
No, I think it's a fair point. I mean, I think kind of what we understood is that meddling in the territories has consequences, right? Like, assassinating a king in the territories has a big consequence in our world. Doing whatever Morgan Sloat was doing in their version of his building that killed Jerry Bledsoe. But like, this is just like coming back. And it is really interesting that he immediately goes to, this must have been me. It's my fault. I did this. I'm responsible. And it works, from a plot perspective of like, it allows us to kind of explain why Jack isn't just flipping back and forth willy-nilly. Like every time he has a problem, every time he's trapped somewhere, oh, I can just flip and get out of it. It kind of moves that off the table. But that's just from Jack's perspective. You're right. What is the reality of this? Did he actually cause this thing? That doesn't seem fair in your whole idea of, karmic retribution. That doesn't seem like it's deserved.
Yeah, I mean, what did he do other than just flip, right? Like so that's why I'm sort of rolling to disbelieve here.
Yeah, we'll see, but I think that's a fair reaction to have to that for sure. So we're back with Jack as he heads towards Buckeye Mall, hoping to distract himself from his guilt and travel for a few hours, and also to get some new shoes and to call his mama. Two errands he needs to run.
Mm-hmm.
And in this moment, Matt, is some of my favorite stuff in this whole week, where Jack spots a couple of teens not much older than himself hop out of a car and head into the mall. They see Jack, they make some comments about his appearance, and Jack recognizes something in them. He says, "I'm different now," Jack thought. "I'm not like them anymore." The recognition pierced him with loneliness. So like he sees the things that he should be doing, right? He should be going to a mall, hanging out with kids his age and having fun. And that's not what he's doing now. Now he's this smelly, road weary boy who doesn't belong with those kinds of people anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know how I thought that situation was going to go, but I almost expected some kind of direct confrontation. But no, I think that, like you said, the purpose was just to show him what he's missing out on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Jack goes and buys some new shoes, and then he throws them away, and we get this delightful little passage. Jack left the bench and dropped his old shoes in a tall black wastebasket with "Don't be a litterbug" stenciled on it in white. Beneath that, in smaller letters, the wastebasket read, "The Earth is our only home."
Love it. Hilarious.
So this is, I love Stephen King. This is one of those things that I think Stephen would be very tempted to throw in there and then have a character react to it as if to specifically draw attention to what he was doing here. Like have Jack go, "Huh, shows what you know," or something, to put a sign pointing at the joke he just made there that explains the joke a little bit. I think Stephen tends to do that sometimes, and I'm very appreciative that the text here did not do that. That if you're reading along, you can kind of chuckle to yourself at "The Earth is our only home," and then the text just moves along. It doesn't spend time on that, pointing out the funny little quip that our authors just made.
It's so tempting, though.
It is really tempting, and I really appreciate that they didn't, because there's a possibility that you could read over that and just not draw the connection and just miss the joke.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. It's not a necessary joke to the plot. It's just a little fun little haha. No, it's not. The Earth is not our only home.
Right.
Get it? But I just appreciate their willingness to let it go.
It is. Yeah, I agree. But it is funny though, because this connects to this idea you were just saying about environmentalism themes, where once again it's saying don't be a litter bug, and that's a very our Earth concern.
So Jack grabs a bite to eat and then goes to call his mom. They have what is actually, Matt, just a pleasant little conversation. I don't know if I've said this already, but I do love Jack and his mother's relationship. I kind of love the way they talk to each other sometimes. Like this part here where she says, I kind of miss you when you're not moping around and telling me how to act with waiters. You're just too classy for most waiters, that's all," Jack said, and thought that he might begin to cry with relief. I love their relationship a lot.
Yeah, me too. It's a very well fleshed out relationship. The very, the loving and playful teasing is just so wholesome.
Yep. So we learn that Lily is hanging in there and that she managed to send old Morgan Sloat packing a couple days ago. But then something happens to the phone, Matt. Some ear-piercing static hits the line and Lily Sawyer is gone. Morgan Sloat's voice was now on the line, and he basically threatens to kill Jack unless he heads home. So what is it about telephones in this world, Matt, in this book? The telephones seem universally bad in this story. What is about them?
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting how this may or may not relate to the idea of like the previous disaster involving electricity. Like they did something that caused an electrical disaster on Earth, so somebody is using electricity magic. I don't
Sure.
I don't know. Yet again, evil telephones for some reason strikes me as a very Strawbian idea.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I don't exactly know why, but I feel that way too.
I thought there were times in Ghost Story when people would be on the phone or they'd get a phone call and it would be creepy, but now I'm really grasping to remember exactly why.
I feel like you're right. I feel like you're definitely right there. So that is the end of the chapter. Morgan threatens Jack, calls him a murderer, which hits him right where he lives, right? It's just so perfect that Jack is dealing with this guilt of what he thinks he did, and Morgan hits him right there.
Yeah, it's great.
But after that, the phone just like completely falls off the wall. Just like completely collapses off the wall, which again goes to the otherworldliness kind of invading our mundane world. Like, this is a mall. He just saw some teenagers just hanging out, and now there's a monster on the other line, and the phone is just collapsing off the wall.
Yeah, I love that. It just disintegrates almost. It's so good.
Yeah. So Jack gets the hell out of there, and that is where our chapter ends for the week. So that's it, Matt. We did it. We did it. So we'll pick up next week with, I think we're finishing off part 2. We're finishing off the Road of Trials next week with the last 4 or 5 chapters in that section. So that's very exciting. I can't wait to finish this very important part of the hero's journey with you.
Yeah. The next part is and then everything was great for the rest of the story, right? That's the next station.
Sure.
Good.
Because that's how stories work, right? They go through trials and tribulations, and then everything automatically gets better. Yeah. There's no such thing as a low point. Right. Never happens.
Like 1/3 of the way through the story, everything becomes great.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep. Speaking of stories in which that definitely does not happen, last week we asked the question, what is your favorite story based on the Odyssey? And we got a lot of great responses, so we're going to go through them right now.
Yes, we are.
Begin, Matt.
So first we had from Walking Dude 22. As to the Odyssey, I'm going to say Toy Story. All of the first 3 really fit the mold. Our heroes answer the call to adventure, leave the safety of home, and have adventures before returning home to find things changed. Of course, I haven't read the book, so it's hard for me to do an insightful analysis. Bad question. Boo, hiss.
Your face is a bad question.
That's right.
Boom.
Gotcha.
Pear Jane says, this is a tough question. I immediately Googled stories inspired by the Odyssey and found a list of books I've never read, plus Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And that was it. So I'm going to be a bit liberal with the interpretation and go with the hero's journey where the ultimate destination is home or family. That includes everything from The Wizard of Oz to planes, trains, and automobiles, but I'm going to pick Labyrinth. There are those of us who saw the movie right at Jack's liminal age, where the attention of a cruel but weirdly sexy and androgynous Goblin King is both frightening and stimulating, and there is everyone else. Sarah's quest to save her brother and return home is a clear metaphor for leaving childhood behind and growing into adulthood. She's 14, has endured the loss of her mother and the remarriage of her father, and she fancies herself the star of her own fairy tale. Her room is more like a child's than a teenager's. She uses her children's books, games, and stuffed animals to protect herself from her new reality. When she wishes away her baby brother, she's wishing away adult responsibility. On her quest, she befriends fantasy creatures who help her as she passes through forests, swamps, cities, a terrifying junkyard, and even loses her memory at one point. The masquerade is parallel to the siren song. It goes on from there, but very good response. I think that's a very creative response. I like that. I haven't seen Labyrinth in forever. I need to rewatch that movie.
I watched the first bit of it just a few days ago because my youngest wanted to watch it, and I was like, I never really appreciated this movie properly. This is really good, really well made.
What did she think of it?
She loves it. She had seen it before. I'm not sure where, and then she was like, I want to watch Labyrinth, and I was like, sure, of course. Yeah. All right, next we have Corinna 2020, who says, I've been thinking about stories that are similar to the Odyssey, and the one that crossed my mind was the never-ending story. Both Bastian and Atreyu are on their own journeys in the story and facing their own trials. Bastian facing his fears of bullies and growing up, while Atreyu facing real trials and the loss of his horse, which always slays me, and facing up to the trials, getting to the end to save the world from the nothing. And of course, there is Falkor, the coolest creature ever in a story.
Yeah, I never thought about the never-ending story that way, but I think it does work.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some trials. I mean, there's a part of the story that's like explicitly like you've got to face these actual trials in order to
Mm-hmm.
get past the There's like the laser eye statues, which were terrifying to me as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just great.
Isn't it weird how like the Odyssey the funny thing about the Odyssey is it's this series of trials that the crew experiences on their Odyssey home, and then like there's a part where Odysseus just like lives like for years with I can't remember the character's name.
Is it Cersei or something
I
like
think
that?
so. He just like lives there for years. It's I don't know, like it's just the timing of it seems it's so funny to me. None of the Odyssey adaptations I've seen have done that because it's just a weird thing. It's like I must stay home to be my family, but also I'm just gonna chill here for a long time.
Yeah, it is. They, I don't think they'd quite figured out, pacing yet.
Those fucking Greeks. What do you know, Homer?
Yeah, Homer.
Just a stupid Simpson.
Yeah, that is a great The Simpsons reference that Homer made.
Next up, we have Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, who says, so I'm taking a looser interpretation of the question. Shame on me. Actually, what Baby Can You Dig Your Sam actually did was answer the question that we should have asked. Not like we asked the question, what is your favorite adaptation of the Odyssey? We should have just said, what is your favorite adaptation of the hero's journey? So that's what Sam does here. And they say the original Star Wars ticks off all the hero's journey boxes, but I'll mention a knockoff instead, The Last Starfighter. Definitely a film of its time. It features our reluctant hero, Alex Rogan, whose proficiency at an arcade game gets him recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Xur and the Kodan Armada. A truly fun popcorn flick I fondly remember from the days of VHS, which is where those little people live in the tape and they act out the things for you. I only ever visited one Planet Hollywood, and all the props they had, it was Xur's scepter that truly brought out the geek in me. I expected a Back to the Future hollow board and a pair of ruby slippers, but Xur's scepter, so random and utterly fulfilling. Others great heroes' journeys include George Bailey, Marty McFly, and Rocky Balboa. I could also have talked about the journey of Jack and Lost, but Matt won't let us. Matt won't let us talk about Lost. It's like a law now. It's a doof law.
Stop saying the word.
Hey Matt, but Jack's journey in Lost is actually really solid.
Is it the Odyssey?
I mean,
does he does return home?
That's true.
And he has to shoot an arrow through a bunch of axe handles. I think I remember that happening.
I don't think that happens.
You sure?
No. I mean, like metaphorically, yeah, he has to shoot an arrow through a bunch of axe handles.
That's what I meant, of course.
He also just like lives on an island for years away from his home, which is very Odyssey.
That's
as we
true.
Already talked about. And
there's that part when Odysseus's father was a surgeon and his body was on the flight. Anyway, next.
Does Odysseus have daddy issues? Because like,
I don't know.
Everybody in Lost has daddy issues, like really hardcore daddy issues. I think Damon Lindelof has daddy issues.
Probably. I don't remember if Odysseus's father is even a named character, honestly. But
I don't know.
I don't know.
I feel like I'll never be like a creative enough person until I develop some daddy issues. But like 36 seems too late in life to suddenly develop those. Because I have a great relationship with my dad. I don't got any issues.
Yeah, you can make something up.
That's true.
You can always.
Everything that's wrong with me is actually all my dad's fault, if you think about it.
That's the spirit. But yeah, The Last Starfighter is a great movie, by the way.
It is. It's a very good movie.
All right. The Walk-in Hard Case says, well, I'll be a son of a bitch. Delmar's been saved. Which is, of course, a reference to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yes.
Which I just watched this week also.
Yeah, if you are curious what our thoughts on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou are, you can tune into our podcast that's coming out on Friday because we're coincidentally talking about that movie this week.
It is a coincidence. They go on to say that they love Oh Brother, Where Art Thou so much. Incredibly well-made and fun film. Great acting, great story, great music, and so many one-liners. To this day, my friend and I throw, damn, we're in a tight spot, back and forth with the hair cream. And hair cream is always put down as hair jelly on my shopping list. That's some staying power.
It's a delightful movie.
Yeah,
it really is. All right, next we have Felidao, who says the Lord of the Rings, in many ways, has a very Odyssey-like structure. To paint in broad strokes, they're what I would describe. These are what I would describe as the main story beats of the Odyssey. I have to cheat a little here by also bringing in the Iliad, but essentially, the reluctant hero is called away to war, leaving behind their beloved family and homeland. The hero, after many tribulations, wins the war and sets out on their journey home. The hero finds the homecoming marred by villainous elements that have sprung up in their absence and is forced to fight one last battle to clean house before finally being able to enjoy the peace they have fought and yearned for. Like Odysseus, who's tried to shirk his duty to join the siege of Troy, Frodo initially resists any involvement in the destruction of the One Ring. They were, of course, both unsuccessful. Odysseus' trials described in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and Frodo playing a pivotal role in the War of the Ring. Odysseus comes home to find a bunch of fuckboys trying to bang his wife, and Frodo returns to discover that Saruman has introduced the worst elements of the Industrial Revolution to the once verdant and peaceable lands of the Shire. Odysseus, with the help of his son and several loyal servants, sends all the trespassers in his house to the underworld, and Frodo, with the aid of Sam, Merry, Pippin, and other good hobbits, kicks Saruman's ass. And while we're riffing on the parallels, this basically makes Gollum the Trojan horse, which is pretty cool.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, I like that interpretation. I think, to me, the thing that's unique about the Odyssean structure is not just, the road of trials, but like the Lord of the Rings is very textually, a there and back again story. And the Odyssey is not that. Like, if you bring in the Iliad, but not even, because like there's no there in the Iliad, like,
Yeah.
The important part to me of the structure of the Odyssey is the trials and tribulations to return home.
Mm-hmm.
It's specific to trying to get home. And so, I mean, I agree that the scourging of the Shire is a big part of that. I think that mostly lines up with the Odyssey, but there's a whole lot of stuff that happens in the Lord of the Rings that are definitely trials and tribulations, but to my eye, not that Odyssean.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, we can always map everything onto everything else if we want.
No. But I like that a lot. I like tying the scourging of the Shire to Odysseus's challenges when he gets home.
Yeah, absolutely. The returning home part, I think, is the best fit.
Yeah.
Next, Darkbeer Rules says, my favorite story based on the Odyssey has to be Book 3 of the Kingkiller Chronicles, The Doors of Stone by Patrick Rothfuss.
Why are you doing this to us?
They say, when it came out, I was super excited, and boy, it didn't disappoint. The way that both took care of, oh wait, that was in my dreams. Dang it. Because the book is not out yet, everyone. That's
never going to come out.
Seriously, though, I feel like almost all of my favorite stories are, if not based on the Odyssey, then at least in the style of it. Most of Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series are an excellent and different take on the quest. Obviously, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Harry Potter series, Lawhead's Song of Albion series, and Pratchett's Going Postal, Making Money, and Raising Steam. Moist von Lipwig is the best and best named character ever. Even Aragon, but only that book in the series. I couldn't suffer through the rest of it. It's just universally harmonic within people, I think, to love this kind of story. Is it cheating just to name every truly good book there is? No, it's not.
No.
Yeah.
I love that. And I mean, it is so true. Like it's all you have to know to see how ubiquitous the Odyssey is in our culture is that the word Odyssey exists in what is an Odyssey? We've defined a term based on this book alone.
The specific story. Yeah.
I think I saw a meme like today where it was like Odysseus saying to his crew, "We're about to go on an Odyssey," and his crew goes, "What's an Odyssey?" And he's like, "It's a long journey named after the only survivor." And they're like, "Wait, what?"
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, we talked about archetypes off and on our shows, and like an archetype is just like a pattern in storytelling that human beings happen to like. It's sort of like a perfect fifth in music or something, where it's just like human beings just find it pleasing when it happens, and
yes,
and the Odyssey is just full of so many really effective archetypes that have just popped up in storytelling forever, probably even before the Odyssey, honestly. Like it probably had antecedents that we don't even know about anymore because they've been lost to history.
100%. I mean, this is kind of what Campbell and the monomyth was all about, that looking and seeing these things that are just so ingrained in humanity, that these things we talk about, and the Odyssey is a big part of that for sure.
Yep.
So Complicated 9519 says, I'll give Dragon's Teeth as the answer. A story originally written by Michael Crichton but never finished, taken over and written by someone else. Guess that would also be considered a book written by more than one person, huh? Anyway, the story is about a college kid who adventures out into the Wild West during the famous Bone Wars. He ends up... Wait, is that a thing?
Yeah.
Was that a real thing?
Mm-hmm.
What are the Bone Wars?
Dinosaur bone paleontologists basically fighting for reputation over who was going to be the one to discover all these dinosaurs, and they would sabotage each other and stuff. It's very interesting historical thing.
Wow. He ends up joining a party of either Marsh or Cope, can't remember who, but ends up getting abandoned to join the others' party. Due to some issues after digging up some fossils, he and a band of paleontologists get stuck in the West. The main character then is on an intense journey through the lawless wastelands with boxes upon boxes of fossils he is trying to bring back for the famed man. It's actually a wonderful story.
Cool.
Now, if you ask this again in 2023, I promise my answer will be Stephen Fry's new book he is dropping in October called The Odyssey. He has a 3-book collection so far of Greek mythos written in his own style. Mythos, Heroes, and Troy. I love all the stories and cannot wait for the next one.
Cool.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah. I wish I knew more about the Bone Wars, actually. I know it sounds like an incredibly compelling period of history.
Yeah, I kind of want to read this Crichton. I remember seeing this Crichton book in stores, and I did my very cynical thing of like, that man's dead. He can't. There's no way he wrote this book. He dead. This is a marketing gimmick. He's dead. So I didn't ever read it.
Sounds like you might have been half right, but maybe it was still a good book anyway.
Yeah, very, very possible.
All right. All84001 says, you guys went from a question last week that had only one good answer, good omens, to a question this week that has countless answers. Bravo. Depending on your interpretation of what it means to be based on the Odyssey, you can make a case for just about anything. Homer's tale is as foundational as Campbell's hero with 1,000 faces. I'll go literal, as in literally has Odyssey in the title. Stanley Kubrick's sci-fi opus, Bergen Linden. Kidding. Of course, I mean 2001, A Space Odyssey. Although I'll admit to falling asleep during my first watch. The pacing is famously inaccessible, especially to those of us who grew up on Star Wars. Eventually, I gave it another shot and embraced it for the true piece of cinematic artistry that it is. I won't waste anyone's time with my take on it, but there are a bazillion much better ones out there. Needless to say, it's a classic worthy of its esteem.
And you could say that in the Odyssey, he is traveling home in a way.
You could. He's traveling to his own birth.
Space baby.
Space birth.
Space baby. It's very late, folks. No, I like that answer a whole lot.
Yeah.
All right, so Kingy 1701A says, I discovered your podcast late last year and have only just caught up so I can finally join in the discussion. Hey, welcome, Kingy. I also read The Talisman last year, and though I enjoyed it, it was not one of my favorite King books, possibly because of the collaborative writing style. However, I am finding it somewhat therapeutic listening to your coverage now, as sadly Jack's quest is something I can currently relate very strongly to. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope everything's going okay with you. I'm assuming how it's relation, and I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
In terms of the discussion question, my favorite story inspired by the Odyssey is the 80s cartoon show Ulysses 31. For those who haven't seen it, it's more or less a direct adaptation, except it's set in the 31st century and, in space. Ulysses himself has a cool weapon that is a lightsaber, but also a laser gun, and there's a cute robot too. So maybe not quite an exact adaptation, but I remember even as a kid realizing that this was the kind of story that we wouldn't usually see on kids' TV. There was a richness and complexity to it that felt far more adult than usual Saturday morning fare. I managed to get a copy when it was released on DVD, and it holds up very well. It also has one of the best 80s kids' TV theme tunes, which if you haven't heard, you must check out.
I'm looking at pictures of this because I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Is this one of those things from the other dimension? Is this from another level of the tower?
It could be.
Where we didn't actually get this show on our level. But I can find the pictures, though. So,
you know what the fun thing is? Like, no one actually answered with Ulysses, which is probably the most obvious answer, because it is like directly and textually just a retelling of the Odyssey. But here's the thing about it. No one's read it. I refuse to believe any human being that is alive right now has ever read Ulysses. And if people write in and tell me, no, I've read it, you're lying, and I don't believe you.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm glad none of our listeners are liars.
Yeah. Everyone has tried to read Ulysses. No one has succeeded.
But thanks for bringing Ulysses 21 to our attention.
31.
Kingy, because I had never heard of this.
I'm gonna watch the show, and then I'm just gonna tell people I read Ulysses, and no one's gonna call me
Talk
on it.
about the laser sword thing.
Yeah.
And pretend that happens in the book Ulysses. Yeah, no, that's a really good idea.
That's a Friends reference.
Okay.
Where two of the characters go to a book club thing, and Rachel never reads the books, and so Phoebe tells her what the books are about, and then she gets annoyed by her leeching on her work, and she makes up all this stuff, and she explains it in the class. It's a good joke that I just explained and thus ruined.
Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome. You can do all these fucking obscure references to Simpsons and shit. I get one Friends reference in, and it's like I'm the fucking devil.
You can get in more Friends references that I'll just stare blankly at. It's fine. All right, next from Steve D. Favorite Odyssey inspired story, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The Coen brothers so rarely disappoint. You've got the journey of the three heroes, the Sirens, John Goodman, Cyclops, etc. Plus, it's one of the few movies where George Clooney does not act like he does in every other movie. Not that it's a bad thing. Clooney also rarely disappoints. I was noticing that when we watched it. I was like, it's so fun to see George Clooney like be a character, because when somebody has that leading man energy, they sometimes just fall into being that leading man guy all the time.
Sure.
The character he plays in that movie is so great.
Yeah, and once again, we'll say if you want to hear us talk about it more, press the plus button on your podcatcher and type in Doofcast, and then you'll see it tomorrow.
That's right.
All right, we have Daniel D, who says, hello. When I was looking through the list of similar books, I either hadn't read them, it's probably Ulysses, or really didn't think they applied, or I didn't love them. So although it isn't quite the same, I'll go with the Earth's Children's series by Jean M. Auli?
Jean All.
Huh?
Jean All.
Is that really how you say it?
Yes.
That's really upsetting.
These are the porn books that I told you about.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The first book is The Clan of the Cave Bear, and it doesn't really fit the criteria. Books 2, 3, and 4, however, are Isla traveling with her big donged bow. Yeah, there we go. Porn books. John Delar from her neck of the woods to his homeland. They have the first ever broken horses and the first domesticated wolf as traveling companions. On their journey, she meets new Cro-Magnon folks after only hanging out with Neanderthals her whole life due to a disaster that left them alone and near death as a child who was saved and raised by cavemen. They hunt mammoths and live in mammoth huts. Isla learns some magic, which is really tripping balls on hallucinogenic teas. They travel up, across, and down a melting glacier. They run amok as a group of badass dames who got fed up with dudes. They hunt sturgeon as big as whales, invent soap and projectile weaponry, amongst other things. They also, of course, have to contend with the old school version of Mother Nature. While it is a tad far-fetched, we are a group of people who, whenever we see a turtle, say out loud and proud, see the turtle of enormous girth. So suspending disbelief is right up our alleys. There's also plenty of sexy times if that's your thing. If not, a couple page speed read gets you over the hump, so to speak. The hump. I see what you did there, Daniel. The hump.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of speed reading, though, to be honest. No, these are great. I never in a million years would have thought to compare these to the Odyssey. But yeah, they basically, setting aside the first book, they are it is a journey home because they're heading back to. It's not her home. It's his home. But yeah, it's basically this journey across Pleistocene Europe, encountering all of these crazy situations. So there's even some sirens in there in a certain metaphorical sense.
I feel like Odysseus definitely goes on a bang Odyssey as well. So
he does.
That seems accurate to that.
It probably just got censored out. There probably was like an epic, 15-minute long sex scene in the Odyssey that just...
Matt, what is this imaginary person that's censoring Homer? Like he delivers his first draft and is like, you're going to have to cut the orgy. Sorry.
It was probably people just stopped. They just stopped reciting it.
It was Zeus. The Zeus fucking
It
guy.
probably
is
was
like,
Zeus, because Zeus is jealous.
I can't stand that all these people are having sex and it's not with me.
Exactly. That's totally a thing that Zeus would have done. Or maybe it was a sex scene that like portrayed him in a negative light. He didn't like that.
God, I love the petty Greek gods. They're so amazing.
All right. Richard K says, long time listener, first time question responder. My favorite story inspired by the Odyssey is Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. Wade Watts had an epic hero's journey and grew way more as a character through the story than even Odysseus manages to. Ready Player 2 was nowhere near as satisfying, but number 1 was an amazing ride and hard to live up to. Yeah, that was a fun story. I can see some of the parallels for sure. Yeah,
I think so. They're much more structural in that than like in the Odyssey. He just kind of runs into different issues as he goes, but in Ready Player One, they're more like, here are the trials you're going to be facing. Like they are, you must find the trial and then you will do the trial.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like the actual obstacles. Yeah, they're more explicit. Yeah.
Steve L says it's got to be the 2-book series Ilium and Odyssey by Dan Simmons. It's an epic sci-fi tale mixing AIs from Jupiter's moon Io and the Trojan War. This may sound hokey, but the story is wickedly smart with characters you love and hate and makes you think deeply about humans' behavior, morals, and purpose. It's intense, funny, loving, and surreal at times. A must read.
Yeah.
I need to read more Dan Simmons, man.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, been meaning to, but haven't managed it.
That sounds right up my alley, though. I don't know if I ever said this, but like my grandfather used to buy me like really age inappropriate books as a kid, and not because like they had bad stuff in them, but just like way beyond my reading level. And one of the things he bought me when I was like 6 was a packaged version of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And like I was just way too young. But my dad would like read it to me and then like explain what was happening here. And it's like one of my earliest memories of being read to. And it was so freaking cool.
That's
so
cool.
I have a lot of emotional attachment to these 2 stories in particular.
I love it. That's awesome.
All right. So that is going to do it for us this week. Thank you everyone for your answers. That was very fun. And I do wish we had done the hero's journey, the general hero's journey question, but I still think we got a lot of good responses here.
Yeah, me too.
So what is our question next week, Matt?
What are your favorite descriptions of otherworldly beauty?
Yeah, so to fit with the long conversation we had about Jack's cheerfulness at seeing the otherworldly nature of the territories, you might have to do some work here because you're going to have to go digging through your books to find those passages that describe that, or you can be a little bit more general with it. But either way, we want to hear from you. Let us know what writing do you just love about the otherworldly beauty of places. You know, that's one thing novels can do. Just write about things that no one will ever see, and you don't have to worry about having to make them in real life because it's just words.
Exactly.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. Next week, part 2, The Road of Trials, concludes with chapters 15 through 19. We are just carving our way right through this book, Matt. It's going so fast. I can't believe it.
Awesome. Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, over on the subreddit r/doofmedia.
Yeah, and something really cool has been happening, Matt. A lot of people are reaching out to us saying this is their first time they've read the Talisman, and they're really enjoying reading it along with us, which is cool because, you know, I think with all of our Dark Tower books, for the most part, everyone, you know, following along had read them before because that's just how Dark Tower fans are. So it's cool seeing so many, even some of our regular listeners, letting us know that they're experiencing the Talisman for the first time because they had never checked it out.
That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah.
But if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, what are you doing? You should be ashamed of yourself, basically. Like, just sit there and wallow in your shame. You're as responsible for all the bad things as Jack was, flipping into the territories and causing an earthquake.
How embarrassing.
So quickly fix that immediately by going to whatever podcatcher that you use and subscribing to us. We're on all of them.
That's right. And if you like any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Renee R., John C., and Benjamin H. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over there on the Patreon, including our bonus podcast, Other Levels of the Tower, where we talk about Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah, last month we talked about the miniseries version of The Shining, which was a fun conversation. And I think here in a couple weeks, we're going to release our episode talking about the movie 1408, the John Cusack movie that I quite enjoy. So I can't wait. We haven't recorded that one yet, but I'm assuming it's going to be great because come on. It's us. We also have a bonus weekly thing we're calling Doof After Dark, which is really just sometimes we let the recording roll after we finish the podcast proper and talk about random stuff. And we try to release those not every week, but most weeks on Monday, just for our patron subscribers. So you can hear some other random stuff that we're talking about that maybe aren't focused enough to make it into a full episode.
Yeah, those are always fun.
They are fun. All right, but of course, if you cannot afford to donate and get all that cool stuff, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by just sharing the podcast. Please continue sharing it with everyone. There's a bunch of people out there who maybe haven't read The Talisman for the first time, and this is a great opportunity for them to do so. So share it with them. Also, you can help us out by leaving a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from John B82, who gives us 5 whole stars and says, amazing show. First time Doof listener, long time King reader. I hate I'm 2 years late, but I love this podcast /book club. Well, thank you so much, John B. That's very kind of you.
Yes, thank you so much. Very, very short and sweet. Love it.
Yeah, very short, which works for our incredibly late time that we have right now.
It does.
So that's going to do it for us. We'll see you right back here next week as we finish part 2 of The Talisman. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.